Ooh, I like this size. This is good, and I'll do one of those.
Okay.
Oh right, all right. Can you buy them individually? No.
Well, if you really want, yes. Every time I take the lid off, I get a whiff of it. I just did. Oh, it's got a lovely smell. There you go. It's like toffee now that it's cold. So there's a mix of people come here, including people that are looking for something to take home. People that are here for a break, or maybe they're working here and they're about to go back to the country they came from. And this particular market, it's lovely. The organisers make sure that the quality of what's being sold here is quite good. So it's a really diverse place, and that's one of the joys of this place, is that you speak to all kinds of people. Folk from many different countries who are curious about the kinds of honeys that we can make here, or many people come here with tales of beekeepers and their families, and they can relate to what we're doing here. That is the heather. Do you want to try another one? Thank you. Nice to meet you. Hi. My name is Gavin Ramsey. I'm a beekeeper, interested in conservation, interested in wild insects. My background as a scientist, I'm a geneticist. Using my science background is really useful. It means that you have a certain insight into genetics and some of those issues to do with conservation. In fact, my career was, although it was in genetics, conservation was a major part of what I was involved with, in crop plants rather than insects. When beekeepers in Scotland had a chance to discuss things online, it was great because we were getting a number of different people across the country able to come together and share their interests and experiences, and it became obvious that it was particularly difficult to find pure examples of the original Scottish native honeybee. Using the tests available to us at the time, it was quite hard to assure ourselves that we were finding anything pure left on the mainland. We draw parallels often between the Scottish native honeybee and the Scottish wildcat because we face the same sorts of issues. People like to keep cats. They take domesticated cats into their cottages scattered about Scotland, and as a result, any local wildcats end up mating with such cats, and therefore it's been very difficult for researchers to find, enthusiastic conservation people, to find pure Scottish wildcats for some time now. So it's really very similar for honeybees. Increase in beekeeping, the demand for stocks from traders, plus an element of commercial beekeeping, expanding and taking non-native stocks into areas. So that's a very parallel reason as to why it's difficult to conserve what's left, because there's very little left to find. So a group of trustees of the Scottish Native Honeybee Society were keen enough to fund a short holiday for themselves onto Colonsay. Never a great hardship, it's always a great place to visit. And our main aim there was to begin to try out the techniques that we would need for instrumental insemination. So this is the second time, my second visit to Colonsay. There was a group of beekeepers, which included John over there, visited Colonsay 5 years ago, 2017.
We were invited to come to a group of us from Scottish Native Honeybee Society to come to Colonsay. And Andrew was going to show us about his bees, and that first visit was really excellent and magical.
The reason that Colonsay is a kind of mecca for people interested in the conservation of the black bee or the original native honeybee is that Andrew Abrahams lives there.
Well, I came to Colonsay in 1976 to farm oysters, and that has been my main living over the past 30, 40 years. And the bees were very much secondary to that. Oysters take a good long while. Well, they take at least three years to grow. And obviously there's a big investment, and I was looking for other ways of making a living as the crops were growing. And where I live on the south end of the island, the neighbouring farm, Barrelrumandu, there was a shed full of hives, old WBC Glen hives and a lot of nucleus hives. And I was interested. I got to thinking, well, why had they been there? And basically the story there was that during the 1940s and 50s and through into the 60s, Colonsay had been a reserve for the black bee. Gentleman Tinsley, Joseph Tinsley, had been the bee inspector for the West of Scotland College of Agriculture at Auchencruve. And he, very foresighted, way ahead of his time, really, but he could see the imports of stock coming in from Europe, and what was left of the native honeybee, the black bee, Apis mellifera mellifera, was all getting crossed out. Tinsley set up a program here and was really quite successful. He trained up a local farmer, Neil McNeil, Neely Bee, and they worked together through the 40s, 50s and early 60s. And then one way or another funding ran out. The long and the short was that that project really finished. Nearly moved away over to Islay and took the bees with him.
It's always great visiting the West Coast. It's such an unspoilt, beautiful part of the world. Being on a boat to go out to an island for a few hours, that just adds to the mystique and the adventure, and it's lovely.
Vehicle drivers and their passengers, please return to the vehicle deck now. Passengers are reminded to take extra care when going down the stairs or walking on the car deck, and follow instructions from any crew members.
Colonsay is a nice small island, a small community where people know each other. A lot of visitors, of course, in the summer, but for the rest of the year they live a good life. It's a beautiful environment, nice people, nice things to do. So to maintain special populations of honeybees, there are two ways of going about it. Andrew has gone for taking good material onto an island. The other way to do it is to use high technology, which has some advantages, but it's also really tricky. And that would be to collect semen from honeybee drones, the males, and then use that semen to inseminate virgin queens that haven't yet mated, and then use those queens to head colonies. And then those stocks will have the characteristics of the virgin queen that you raised, which you control by raising virgins artificially, and the qualities of the drones that you've got out to collect, drones to collect the semen. So you know exactly what you're mixing together. So two approaches: open mating in the skies and instrumental insemination.
Good morning, folks. How are you?
Fine. Given that Andrew on Colonsay has the biggest diversity of native stocks around, then it would make sense for us to do instrumental insemination between semen collected from his stocks and virgins raised from stocks from elsewhere.
It is improving, and looking at it by about 2 or 3 o'clock, I think it might not be too bad.
So that group of trustees, myself, Sarah, treasurer, John, our deputy chair at the time, David, Jim, who is establishing a group in the Moorfoots, spend a couple of days with Andrew going around his apiaries and trying out the ability to extract semen from drones into tubes that we could then take back onto the mainland, where we were raising virgins, that an expert in instrumental insemination from Shetland was coming down to help us achieve.
That doesn't make any sense. So I've picked up the bees. If we put them at this apiary out here, we can get those ones straight in rather than going backwards and forwards. Okay?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, perfect.
Right.
Thank you.
the green stuff. It's beautiful and old and shows the dampness and everything.
There's certainly plenty of bees. It's usually the... Yeah, I think she's okay there. Better knife. This is... you don't cut it with this knife. That's the older queen. We can go on to the next bit. Really
How many seconds for?
So
Right
there's
here.
only one pen, so we'll only it's your blue.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, go. Oh no.
Oh. Cuddle them together.
They can't even see the window because it's
Steamed up. I know I might have to put a windscreen wiper down.
come here. Science has also developed in quite strongly, and especially in molecular techniques. So we're really fortunate to have around now scientists that have some background in, and even are still active, in using things like DNA techniques to look at the diversity, but also the identity of different honeybee stocks around the place. So here in Scotland, we're really lucky that we've got the group at Roslin who are one of the leaders in that.
The Roslin Institute is situated about 8 or 9 miles south of Edinburgh. It's well known for its work in farm animal genetics. The original bee that's been here since after the Ice Age was an M lineage bee, Apis mellifera, mellifera.
M lineages are North and Northwest Europe, and C lineages are more Southeast Europe. There's a bit of variation there with Spain and Portugal. And really what happened was that people were interested in trying to improve honeybees, and they brought imported bees in the same way as happened with all animals in agriculture in the 1800s and 1900s. People improved cattle and sheep and dogs and cows and pigs, and they tried to do the same thing with bees. And one of the challenges with honeybees is that you can't put honeybees in a field and keep them separate. If you breed them, they fly and they open mate. And so what happened was you end up with a sort of roll of the dice of what the genetics is going to be in each colony.
Honeybee genetics are quite a way behind what we know about other farm animals, cows, pigs, sheep and chickens. There's a lot of genes, we don't know where they're expressed, and we don't know what they do. If you look at the honeybee genome, then a lot of the genes don't even have names, they're just numbers. That kind of led to the idea to set up a company to do the low-cost genotyping as a first thing.
So with the idea of Mark's inspiration to found Bee Bites, we went out and spoke to the beekeeping community and asked them if people would be interested in this as a service. And there were lots of people, both individuals and groups, who were interested in finding out more about how much of the native honeybee was still present in the UK and what we could do through genetics to help them identify populations and breed from them and generally protect and conserve the black bee. We decided to make it a community interest company, a social enterprise, because it's not a project to try and make money, it's not a project to commercialize this, it's really to try and offer these services in a low-cost way to beekeepers who want to find out more about their bees.
So we had a lot of sessions with Edinburgh Innovation. They gave us a lot of help in how to set up a company. I certainly didn't have much idea about how to run a company apart from selling honey.
So the beekeepers will provide us with material for a number of drones. And by genotyping all of those drones at the same time, you're effectively reconstructing the queen's genotype. So that tells you what genotypes the queen has. And that's purely because the drones only inherit DNA from the queen.
So the beekeepers, they order a testing kit from us. The beekeepers take the frame of drone brood and they uncap drone brood and find pupae, and then they remove antennae from those and place them in the tube. They put them in an envelope and post them back to us. We then take them and process them, do the DNA extraction, and then have them analysed. The raw data is then passed on to David, and David does the analysis on that, and then that gives us the final standardised report with effectively a score of the level of integration, the level of hybridization, and obviously if all the SNPs come back as M lineage, it would be 100%. If they all came back as C lineage, it would be 0%, and then everything else is a sliding scale from there. When people send us their samples and we sample them, we analyze that data and anonymize it, and then make that data freely available. And we're looking to try and develop a map of the UK so that we can map out where different colonies are with different levels of hybridization, and give people an idea about if there are areas of the UK that still have strong M lineage, strong local bees, or areas where there's high levels of hybridization happening.
It'd tell people whether it was worth conserving, you know, whether it's worth trying to conserve AMM in a particular area.
So where were we? It was Bernard Mobus convinced me that I should look for native black bees that would survive out here. And that was how I got the original stock out to Colonsay. So I'm very grateful to Bernard for, in a way, pointing me in the right direction. And then good luck. I had a lot of good luck just bringing pure stock out. I weeded out anything that had any sign of banding in it, that it might be crossed, and I just carried on. And it was only around 2000 that I got contacted by European geneticists. Many of the European scientists understood that we were losing the pure genetics of black bees, Italian bees, carniolan bees, because a lot of the carniolans are getting inbred, selected too much.
Countries like Slovenia, which is the home of the carniolan honeybee, a popular honeybee across the world, and in a large part of that country you can only keep that bee. So there's regions where they exclude other kinds of bees by law so that their native one can survive and persist. Same's happening across Italy. In several of the large regions of Italy, there's now laws that enforce the keeping only of the native honeybee to that area and not bred types.
There wasn't any push or interest within the UK at all. It was just considered an oddity. The honeybee in Scotland falls between two stools in a way. It is classified both as a domesticated agricultural animal and also as a wild animal. And so it was extremely difficult. I was tossed backwards and forwards between departments, each one saying, this isn't our responsibility. It's a nice idea, but we simply haven't got the legislation to deal with it. This went on for best part of 10 years. And then eventually, with help and input from scientists, from individual politicians who saw the benefit and the long-term value of having a black bee reserve, we managed to get the legislation through that allows only black bees to be kept out here on the two islands, on Colonsay and Oronsay, and that legislation will stick with future generations as well.
On Colonsay and other offshore islands, but on Colonsay you've got one man who's really keen and really knows what he's doing very well. You have land ownership simplified, so then the relationship between that beekeeper and the laird, it becomes really important, but it's been really good. So that's where that continuity came from, a man basing his career on keeping bees, partly on keeping bees, so he was really committed to make it work, and he knew very well what he was doing. And in terms of land ownership and local relationships, he knew that was an issue, and he's handled that very well too. Not so easy for small groups on the mainland to make all that happen. And of course, Andrew was a relatively young man when he started. Most of us, when we have enough time to turn to this sort of activity in beekeeping, we're already getting old a bit, so we don't have that much time left.
It's said that the ideal isolation apiary is a place where no sensible beekeeper in his or her right mind would want to keep bees. And in some respects, this is where Moorfoot ticks all the boxes. It has a very harsh winter. The region also has a very prolonged spring. And bees couldn't survive here throughout the winter and the spring without considerable support by the beekeeper in terms of feeding food and also feeding them pollen. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that's ideal, because I don't want any other beekeepers around. It's not that I don't like other beekeepers, but I don't want them to bring any foreign bees with them if they were to move into this area.
I'm pretty sure these hives, these colonies would not have survived if it were not for the fact that I was feeding them in spring. So I'm going to put this feeder on again. This is a feeder. It's supplying sugar syrup to the bees. This is a hostile environment. The spring here is very, very prolonged. It's about 2 or 3 weeks behind spring in the lowlands, so they need to be supported. As I say, that suits me because it means that other beekeepers won't be around. The second reason for feeding them so much is that they have a huge load of drone brood, male brood, and the young drones don't feed themselves. They need workers to feed them. So it's basically helping the workers to feed the drones, and it's the drones that we're interested in.
I'll explain the process that we're trying to do in our isolation apiary. To start off with the queen, here's the queen. She mates with several drones, about maybe 18 drones. Now she's got the ability to store the sperm in a little structure here, and then she's got the ability to fertilize or not to fertilize the eggs that she lays. Now, unfertilized eggs become drones, and fertilized eggs become females. Now, the drone is the clone of the queen, because no other genetic material is involved. It's purely from her egg that the drone is reproduced. Now the stimulus for that is the size of the cell. She lays eggs that are destined to be drones in larger cells in the colony, and she lays eggs that are destined to become workers that she fertilizes in smaller cells. Now normally this is controlled by the workers in the colony, but what we can do in this isolation apiary situation is supply the colonies with frames with larger cell templates here, so that the queen thinks she's supposed to lay eggs here that she is not supposed to fertilize, and these develop into drones.
Here you can see the difference. This is worker brood, female worker brood, and this is the drone brood here, the domed cells. And it's because we've supplied them with a template with slightly larger cell starters, if you like, which induces the queen to lay drone brood. It means that all the drone brood here is pure Apis mellifera mellifera, the black bee. The worker bees can be of a mixed parentage, but it doesn't matter because they're not involved in the reproductive process. Now here you can see there's loads of drones. The big ones there are drones, which should be Apis mellifera mellifera if the initial queen was Apis mellifera mellifera, and we think she was. Now this is extraordinary. This is all drone brood. Now if you were to find this in a normal hive, you'd be very alarmed. You'd think that the queen has not mated properly, she's unable to fertilize her eggs, and she's just producing drone brood. This is worker brood, and there's lots of worker brood here, which is good because the drones rely on the workers to feed them. The drones normally don't feed themselves, certainly at the young age. So you need a lot of workers to support that huge colony of drones that we've created in this situation, which is not, you know, a normal situation. This is a specific isolation apiary where we want to saturate the areas with drones. And these big bees there, they're all drones, which is amazing. They're not flying yet, which means that they've probably just emerged.
So we have masses of these drone brood, they're called. This is the unborn drones that emerge, and we saturate our area of mountains or wherever with flying drones like this. So we've got drones flying all over the place. The next stage is to introduce virgin Apis mellifera mellifera queen. That is the product of a Apis mellifera mellifera female plus an Apis mellifera mellifera male. They're quite difficult to source, actually. Once we've got them up here, we introduce them into little mating boxes that we put in a shady place, and we supply the boxes with a cupful of bees, which will look after the newly hatched virgin queen, which is pure Apis mellifera mellifera. She then goes out in her mating flight, meets all the drones that are flying around, and then comes back mated and starts laying eggs.
And the little boxes will be placed here, like this, and there are about 25 of them. And it's important to have these in shade because they can heat up when the weather gets hot. So this is quite an ideal place for them. And this is where the virgin queens will fly out and meet the drones, which are over there. And who knows where they will meet, probably up in the sky somewhere. And then
We've been experimenting with putting... Once she's done that, she and some of the bees are introduced into a larger hive and reproduces more eggs and more progeny. So in that way we spread the Apis mellifera around the country, hopefully.
When I started beekeeping in the 70s, most beekeepers and bee farmers used local strains of bees. And everybody could raise a few queens. That skill seems to have disappeared, it's been lost, and it's so much easier to purchase stock that's coming in from abroad. And it's really up to beekeepers to be patient and wait for somebody who's producing local stock. And the associations, in my view, should concentrate on basic, simple skills. Feed, feed, feed. Forget the complicated stuff. Just stick with the simple stuff. And it's what was tried and tested for generations. When I started beekeeping, I don't think there was a bee farmer who was grafting at that time, but there was plenty of queens. And there was plenty of bad weather as well. So if every beekeeper in Scotland raised only 2 queens, you would change overnight the possibility of changing the genetics of the future. That's what's lacking, and that's what really needs to happen, is to get it embedded at association level that raising your own queens is beekeeping.
Do they feel threatened with you when you go to a hive? Like, how do they become comfortable with you, or is it you becoming comfortable with them?
It's a bit of both. So there's a lot of these sort of soft skills that you pick up over time, and the basics of how to manage bees, you're better to be taught, and to use good books. But then you're also better to have a community of beekeepers around you, so that you've got good people to turn to help you out, and to help you find a queen if you've suddenly been unable to find queens again, or you've got a bad-tempered hive, or some issue that you need to deal with, like a failure of a queen.
How does that happen? Right.
It's in eastern Scotland. We're kind of borderline about in terms of climate here, so things go wrong, and you need to know what to do and what to look for, and how you can fix things.
So today's been really quite beautiful weather in Oban, very warm, but as we've been out on the boat now for more than an hour or so and coming closer to the open sea, you really feel the cold winds, and it's a sort of a reminder about the difficult environment that Andrew faces with looking after his bees on Colonsay. So it is rather a special place from that point of view.
Don't answer that question. You've no idea. As we move forward, we have no idea what the climate's going to be like in 20, 50 years' time. It could be warmer, it could be wetter, in fact it could get colder. We're on the edge of the great climatic change that's happening. There's moisture in the ground, so forecast is not good. This summer has been extraordinarily difficult out here. We've had cold, grey weather for months. It won't be like last year. I mean, last year was just amazing because we had a really difficult cold. And then it was fantastic. I mean, it was one of the best years I had.
I think that the bees that Andrew has collected more than 40 years ago and brought to the island are very well acclimatised to life there, and they thrive on a mix of all sorts of wildflowers with a main flow, I suspect, at the end of the year from heather. But interspersed between that, they've got these constant fronts from the Atlantic coming in with bad weather, and then they have some good spells and bad spells, and so they have to be able to moderate the breeding and activities so that the queens are not laying all the time, but controlled in a way by the bees.
I firmly believe that only the black bee that we've got here can take this kind of weather, this constantly changing, not a great deal of sunshine, but when the opportunity comes, the bees work incredibly hard. They really shift, even just for a few hours, for an afternoon, for a morning. Every opportunity they take to be able to forage. We're lucky we've got plenty of forage for them out here. Climatically, it's right at the edge. And we don't know where Scotland is going to be in 40 years' time, but we do know that the black bee is a survivor. It knows how to take difficult climatic conditions, and equally good conditions as well.
So there is the issue of why would you want to conserve the original native type if you can still find it? And is that a good thing to do? And that's a discussion that continues even now. There's traits in different subspecies that might be useful in the future, so looking at it in a selfish way, then we're much better to keep those populations around rather than just let everything be subsumed in a mass of buckfast, which will only have a relatively narrow genetic base.
I think it's a general public perception that people understand the idea that you need more diversity and everything mustn't be the same, but it's a finite amount of diversity in each colony, and so you're adding in some things, you're taking some things away. So, and in a controlled breeding environment, you could try and select for those genes and be really careful about what genes you kept and threw away. But the other problem we have, which is something Mark will talk more about, is not really having a good understanding about which genes control which traits. So that's where the risk is, that you take a really good gene that you didn't know you needed, and by open mating you randomly throw away the good gene, and then 10 years later when it's -30 in winter and there's snow on the ground and all your bees die, you didn't realise that when you introduced those bees, actually you lost that Scottish gene that protects against cold weather or whatever kind of. So.
A kind of bee that was always here found its own way here after the last ice age, and we think it's just right that we should do our best to keep it going, at least in some places, so that it's still there for the future. That's my argument that would counter those that say, well, I just want to keep good bees and I just want to buy the best bees that are going to be nice and give me some honey. Why worry about this extra issue? I think it's important.
The key to success has little to do with beekeeping. It's being able to convince individuals that what you're doing has value.
I think we've got almost a duty of care to try and preserve our natural heritage. Now, this is only possible if you actually stop importing foreign bees, because you can't promote local adaptability if this is undermined by the introduction of a new genetic material from foreign sources.
The Scottish Government has a very strong kind of view on having a healthy honeybee and other pollinator population. But obviously the government has to represent all the different stakeholders in the beekeeping community, which ranges from hobbyists, commercial beekeepers, those with an interest in honeybee conservation, and those interested in other pollinators. So they're not in a position to strongly favour one group over any of the other groups, and so they're unlikely to make a strong move in any particular direction at this stage unless the science or the economic evidence points otherwise.
So there you go, beekeepers are lots of different people, and the Scottish Government's focus is on bee health. So conservation is not a main interest of that group, but there's individuals there that know that it's an issue that we should be addressing in a better way, rather than leaving it up to a small bunch of amateurs that you've been filming for the last couple of years with their bumbling approaches, which I know you'll have captured.
We're in the sunshine now, but we've been in grey for days and days. And, oh shit. It's that hive there that you're upsetting, you see.
I am upsetting.
Yes.
I can, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
You'll learn about bees, Maxim.
Yeah, stay away from them. That's, I think, the best.
That's the best. When you're walking in front of a hive, always walk behind a hive. When you walk in front, the vibration. You're the bear.
Yeah.
You're the bear.